Okay, so yeah, so revolutionizing ELT. That's a really big title, really big promise. And I use that title to get you here. I don't know if we're going to change the whole field today, right? The massive field of English language teaching, but I do hope to give you some ideas about how to revolutionize your own workflow, the workflow of your colleagues, teammates, and people you work with. So that's my hope for today, and you can share with me later if that goal was accomplished. So here's a little bit about me. So why am I here speaking to you today? I'm a business English trainer and consultant based in Germany. I work as an embedded corporate trainer, so it's quite a unique context. So basically, my role involves being embedded in a usually a department or an office or a workplace of the same people, the same company, and doing everything from needs analysis to training, design, and delivery to assessment. So I've got quite a lot of experience with the whole cycle. And in my context, it's very important that people actually improve their ability to do things in English, right? So we'll talk more about that today, but that's kind of at the forefront of my training, right, of my teaching. Yeah, and so basically, I'm also here because I was, an early adopter, I would say, of this. I just luckily stumbled into this technology. I've always had an interest in ed technology, but I stumbled into this when it first came out. I was very excited about it. So I started writing and sharing immediately, right? So I hope that some of my ideas today will encourage and inspire you. And who are you? Well, there are so many of you here today, which is amazing. And unfortunately, this is what I have about you. So this is a very small snapshot. This is a much bigger document compiled of the survey that you all graciously took for us. And so this is great because of course, I'm always going to collect the needs of the people that I'm going to be delivering training to or delivering workshops to, right? And it's really important. But there's not a lot that I can do to get my head around this. So before we even jump in with any of the real ChatGPT stuff today, I thought I'd show you one interesting way that I've used this just to help me set up the workshop that might be of use to you. So I've basically taken all this information, just a lot of text collected from the survey, and I have used ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT, if you have the paid version, ChatGPT Plus, you can use a plugin called Code Interpreter. And what's really exciting about Code Interpreter is you can simply add files, programs, pictures, and it can actually open that and do things with it. So I've simply added that Excel sheet in here and said, I'm delivering a workshop. I've sent out a needs analysis. Can you analyze this and give me key insights to help me plan appropriately? And voila, I've got this wonderful overview of all the information collected about you with ChatGPT's 2 cents about how that might be interesting and important to incorporate into the planning. So you can see I have here some insights about your main questions, your main uses, what you want to take away from the workshop, right? Now, if you're more of a visual person, you might also find this interesting. This is a plugin that can be used with ChatGPT 4, and this is called Diagram. We could talk more about plugins later if you have questions about that, but it's kind of a very exciting, in my opinion, addition to ChatGPT 4 that really adds to its capabilities and also sort of gets rid of a lot of the limitations of earlier versions. So using this plugin, I simply put in the information from the survey and said, I'd like to have some visual insights about the people that I'm going to be speaking to today. And so as you can see here, now we know just with a couple of clicks that a majority of people are in higher education in the school setting. We've got some in private language schools, some corporate people like me, hello to you, and some other contexts as well, right? So that's pretty good to know because that will help me determine the sort of things that I'd share with you today. What else can we glean from this? Well, most people here have experimented a bit with ChatGPT. Some, still about a quarter, have not used it at all. And then there are some experts here as well, and I'm sure they will be happy to share their ideas with us later also. So So now we have a bit of an understanding about where people are coming from today. And here's some information about the most common questions and concerns, right? And this gives me some insight about what people are looking to gain from this, right? So again, this is ChatGPT diagram plugin, really interesting and really nice way to help you analyze data when it comes to something like needs analysis, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Identifying needs, right? If we start at the beginning of needs-based language teaching, how do we do that, right? Well, we can't simply just ask learners, because if you've ever done this, they'll say, well, I need vocabulary, I need grammar, I don't understand this accent or something. And that can be helpful to some degree, but it still doesn't give us enough information to effectively design a language training program. I have never really found pre-published course books and those kinds of things. I've used bits and pieces of that before, but I've never found, it's not surprisingly, that they're not designed for my specific learners with all their idiosyncratic needs in specific contexts. So again, it's not about language items and forms, it's about real discourse and all of its complexity, all of the elements of communication, right? It's not particular words and particular structures, it's everything together holistically, which is also the way that we tend to pick up language as well, right? In a piecemeal kind of way. Now, this can be very time consuming. And I found some shortcuts in some ways that ChatGPT has helped. And so the first thing is that I work with accountants. So I've used this example in webinars before, but I could say, for example, what are 10 tasks that corporate accountants have to do in the English language, right? And in a business English setting, this is very often the case that we're thrown into new environments that, you know, I had worked with IT and engineering before, and a couple of years ago took on accounting. I'm not an accounting expert, right? And so this is very useful for getting my own head around things. Okay, what do they do in a typical day? So thank you, ChatGPT. That's a pretty good overview. And how do I know if that's legitimate? Well, what I can do is turn that into a questionnaire to actually collect input from the kinds of people that I'll be working with, right? So from their supervisors and themselves, right? How often do you have to do this in your company? To what degree? And so simply with a prompt, ChatGPT, create a needs analysis questionnaire for me. This helps me narrow down and speed up this process of determining what it is that the people I'm going to work with have to do, right? And then, as I showed you before, once I collect this information, I can easily use ChatGPT to analyze the information and collect some insights about it that will be helpful. For planning. After I have done the needs analysis process, I can move into organizing that into some kind of syllabus, right? So in a task-based syllabus, once again, to reiterate, we're looking at the completion of real communicative tasks in the real world, right? Is what we're concerned with, right? And so the way that that is typically done in this kind of TBLT is that you have to sequence the tasks that they do in the classroom, in the training room, in ways that gradually increase in complexity. That's outside the scope of this. That is an entire domain of its own in TBLT. But basically, the idea is that I'm not feeding people language. I am putting them through these communicative, pedagogical tasks in the classroom. And what I'm showing here is how we can, however we want to approach syllabus, we can simply prompt ChatGPT. I don't know how simple, but we can prompt ChatGPT to sort of help us take those ideas that we have and put them into like sort of realize them, right? To make them real. So this is what I've done in a brief version. This, of course, needed modification afterwards, but as a start, this is how I began to build a syllabus for B1 accountants in English, right? And you can see I've got units are based on the real tasks that they said they had to do in the needs analysis. I've got the tasks that they actually have to do that move from more input kind of things like reading and understanding a document into output type tasks, right? So the input first, which helps them implicitly build up the language that they're going to need to do more productive things with the language, right? Technically in TBLT, Lexis is one important component of discourse, but I put this here for my own. I said, hey, you know what, ChatGPT, put some key Lexis in there. And that was more for my own understanding in the beginning to think, okay, what kind of language are we going to encounter here? This did not appear on the final version of the syllabus. And then an exit task is, okay, if things went the way we thought they did, and all of this was done effectively, they should be able to do this thing in the end, right? And to me, that is more useful in the context of doing things with language than some written grammar exam that has nothing to do with actually conducting a compliance review or a financial analysis, right? And if you do this in front of me, there is also no plagiarizing, even though I said plagiarizing is not an issue so much, but still, that's one thing to consider. If you can set things up to be done in front of you interactively in an engaging way, it's really difficult to plagiarize them. So that's a really rough draft of a syllabus, but it's generated almost instantly based on the ideas that I wanted to input and the needs that I acquired. Now we're going to get into, I want to talk about a university context. A lot of you work in a university context or a school context, which I think will share similar things. And so I think this is a good model to use. In this case, let's imagine that there is a foundational course for university students, right? And this is quite typical. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of thing where people will go do a year or two of kind of study to build up their skills so that they can then study in English in their university, right? And I've seen all kinds of what I deem inappropriate methods for that. Here's a random course book that doesn't prepare you for studying economics. It's more general English or something like that. And to me, this is an ideal place to start revolutionizing ELT, right? Because it's really, you have everything you need there to set up this kind of program. And so to just start getting my head around it as the course planner here, I might feed ChatGPT some information, right? Always trying to give ChatGPT context for what I'm doing. So this person wants to study economics, needs a B2 level. Just to break it down, what are some productive and receptive skills that he'll need, right? And I generated this instantly with ChatGPT. And to me, this just skips a bunch of steps to clarify my thinking. Of course, everything needs to be checked, double checked, but this is much better than a blank slate, in my opinion, right? And it already starts sending me to the next step in the sort of creative or design process of where I'm going to go, right? And have you ever done anything creative, whether it's, I don't know, doing something like in the arts or even in designing materials and stuff? You might always know creativity seems to be about that next little insight that comes. And one thing I've learned by messing around with ChatGPT a lot is that it speeds up that process. And instead of getting weighed down producing this list myself, I have it, and then I get the next idea, and I get the next idea. So I take this, right, the receptive and productive skills, and as a starting point, and then I say, okay, well, here's some more information, ChatGPT, right? This actually comes from the website of a university's economics program, right? So the program that people are going to be attending in a couple of years, right? And this was information that I found as an outsider, right? So if I were actually working at that school, I would have much more deep insight into what the actual syllabus is. But just taking the courses here as a starting point from the website, feeding them into ChatGPT and saying, okay, so we're going to go back to that syllabus I'd produced before. We're going to orient it that way where it's task and project based. We want to be actually focusing on doing things, but I also want to make sure that they're getting plenty of practice with all 4 of these language skills, right? That we discovered in this step. And so the idea here is just simply telling ChatGPT, include this element into here, and let's try to produce something with it, right? So you might think about even if you don't want to approach your syllabus in the same way as me, what elements can you build in with ChatGPT? How can you remix your syllabus? So given that information, I then generate the first draft of the syllabus. And so now I have each unit is based off of an actual course. So the idea here is that each unit prepares students for this potential course that they'll be taking, right? And so we have a series of tasks that they will be doing. We have a project, right? Right, so we can set the tasks up to serve a project, right? And then in the end, they complete the project. And again, I had vocabulary here, doesn't exactly belong here, still useful to consider, right? But I got a different idea. As I said, you quickly get ideas as soon as you generate one thing. I thought, you know what's interesting? We're talking about AI. A lot of teachers are, asking about how do we get our students to use AI? How do we get our heads around the future of students themselves, right? Because they're going to be entering a world where they're using this stuff all the time. The reality, the real answer is that students are probably going to be teaching you to use AI, likely. But how can we think about incorporating AI into a curriculum, perhaps, in useful ways that actually serve the purposes of the curriculum, of the syllabus, rather? So here we go. We had our original one. I asked ChatGPT to please replace this Lexis stuff. I'll put those words elsewhere and think about them later, with some AI-related skills, right, that are actually tied in to the thing. So here we have using AI to generate summaries of complex theories, right? So we can actually do that in the classroom and as a way of helping to accomplish these tasks, right? So we can build in the tech into the tasks that we need. And I thought, okay, this is a really good start. But then I thought it's not quite what I wanted yet. So I wanted to make it a little bit more relevant and connected to the actual unit. And I wanted to divide it into skills that are categorized in some way. So I thought about some of the useful things that I do with AI, right? Prompting, having a discussion, researching, refining, some categories of skills to help organize this more effectively. Right. Okay. So I guess that's the end of that. So this is just an idea, but this is something to think about, right? How can we actually use AI to think about building AI into the syllabus, right? Or anything else that you might want to or need to include in your syllabus. Okay, the next step here is analyzing discourse, and I was wondering how ChatGPT can help me do that. So many people are familiar with a traditional discourse analysis, where you're really looking at really specific details of word frequency and things like that. This kind of discourse analysis is different in that we're not looking at specific items. We're not looking at things in isolation. We're looking at language more holistically, right? And so what I tried to do here was get ChatGPT to help me analyze the discourse so I know how these communicative situations work. And by the way, you might notice here, my prompts, they're not very flashy. And what I don't think is necessary is having some real explicit understanding of how to craft a good prompt. I hope I'm showing here that you learn this by doing it. It's conversational. You practice this a lot and you start to get an understanding for how ChatGPT is able to take what you're giving it. So it's really important what you say, but I think you just have to dive in and then refine as you go, right? So, but this was mine. I said, basically, this is what we do in discourse analysis. We look to find out how the task at hand is done. We look for building blocks, rhetorical moves, conversational turns, right? And then I told ChatGPT, act as a discourse analyzer. I will type in discourse, the discourse type, and then I'll simply copy and paste a transcript in here. And I would like you to create a table where you analyze this for me. So I found a negotiation simulation on YouTube for this. I put the transcript in here. I told ChatGPT it was a negotiation, and then I just copy and pasted it in, right? I cut it off because it would be way too much text. And then ChatGPT gave me this really nice summary of how this kind of negotiation worked, right? And this would be really useful for me to incorporate when I'm thinking about the kinds of materials or what the task would look like in real life, right? So, and even examples, expressions, right? For expressing the relationship, the conversational turns, the language that is built in there. For me, this is a really useful way to use ChatGPT to analyze and understand how communication situations are done, right? Later, I will share with you a QR code where you can access this itself as a program using my prompt, right? So shared prompts is a really exciting new feature of ChatGPT, relatively new, and you can actually share prompts so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you could simply use this to start analyzing some of your own discourse. You can also modify it. You can say, start telling ChatGPT to do other things with it that are more fitting for your purpose, okay? Back to where we were, right? We've looked at the way we can start thinking about some needs of this future economics student, right? We've talked about why it might not be the most beneficial approach to simply, give them a random course book that supposedly prepares them with general English, and instead to think about the things they're going to have to do with English and how that might be specific. And so what this might look like in training or in teaching, right, in the classroom is, okay, we want them to understand an economics lecture. That is the key task on our syllabus that we're working towards, right? And so what that might look like in a way from moving from more simple versions of that to ultimately more challenging up to the real thing would be something like listening to a piece of it so they have an idea of what it's going to be like. Moving into something where we're building up the schema and vocabulary work. One thing we have to think about is that these people are not, they're not in service. They're not working already in this field. And so they might have a limited knowledge of the topic. And so one of the things that we have to do as language teachers is help to build up the schema here, which naturally is going to mean building up knowledge about economics to some degree, right? It only makes sense if you think about it. We're not going to teach economics language in an isolated way. It has to be connected to the topic in a real way. So after we built up some language, we would do something like listening with an outline. We could produce an outline and listen and check off the topics, right? So you have sort of a guide. So you're not just listening to the lecture. It's not too over your head. You've got a guide. You can check off topics. Then you might listen and read along with an enhanced transcript. And by enhanced, I mean we might take some of those discourse elements we discovered in the discourse analysis and embolden them and make them stand out because they're things that are important for our learners to notice. We want them to have a chance to pick them up, right? We might then move on to listening to the bit without a transcript. So it's like taking the training wheels off, right? And it's like now you just listen without a transcript. You've had the scaffolds gradually removed, and then you might repeat this over time in class or set it for homework outside of class to gradually build up the listening skills, the language, everything needed for this task of understanding an economics lecture, right? Now, this is just an idea of how this might be set up according to the principles that I outlined before, right? Let's look at how ChatGPT can mediate that process. YouTube, once again, wonderful source. I happened to find this almost immediately when setting up this. I said, okay, let's find an economics lecture. And this was actually perfect because this is an intermediate or intro to macroeconomics lecture, similar to what students will actually be doing and hearing. It's a real lecture in that it's not perfectly produced. There's some noises in the background, some chairs, some things like that happening, right? And so it's actually realistic. If people are listening to a lecture in real life, it's not going to be crystal clear quality, right? It's going to be a lecture, most likely. I mean, it depends, but so I actually found the real thing, and I thought, what better way to prepare people to listen to a macroeconomics lecture, right, than to actually have a macroeconomics lecture, right? So as you can see here, YouTube automatically generated a transcript. This transcript is very imperfect. I mean, it's got some mistakes in there and it's got some typographical errors. And I simply took the transcript and put it into ChatGPT and said, hey, fix this for me, right? It's all messy. There's some weird false transcriptions here, some mistakes, and the timestamps are here. All this stuff I don't want when I'm looking at this communicative situation. And this is a great use of ChatGPT. You can copy and paste a transcript into it and do this. And now I've got this nice transcript produced for me to work with instantly, right? So I've got the transcript produced, polished, and much better and ready to use from ChatGPT. So I've got the transcript. And then, okay, I want to see where this is. Now, I listen to it. I can take my own guess. I think, yeah, it's quite advanced, but let's just see what ChatGPT says based on the CEFR, right? How difficult is this, right? And this breaks down. It shows you what its understanding of the CEFR is. And then it says, based on the transcript, it seems to be at B2 or C1, right? The language is relatively complex with a wide range of vocabulary and more advanced sentence structures. It's specific. However, he also explains concepts clearly and provides examples. I mean, that's all spot on in my understanding. If you were to listen to this lecture, you might agree with a lot of these points. And this is another use of ChatGPT, right? Is to analyze to assess. It's not perfect, right? But you can use that along with your own intuitions as a tool to sort of assess the CEFR level of a text to give you guidance in your planning. I took this transcript and I said, let's make some of the key terminology bold, right? As I mentioned before, noticing, right? I'm not going to be able to rote teach every single term and collocation and specialized language that participants need. So this idea that people, if they're encouraged to notice things, are more likely to pick them up, right? And so ChatGPT, I said, hey, can you make this bold, right? So that we can have these stand out in the transcript. If you remember, one of the things that students would do is listen to this segment of an economics and read this along with it, which helps them kind of, comprehend more, map the sounds to the words, and also makes these words stand out, right? To promote noticing. And that's another use of ChatGPT. So it's already taken the transcript, cleaned it up for us, and now we have it here helping us out by making things salient, making things bold. Now, remember back, so one of my initial tasks in this section is to create a discussion, or this could also be something that's done as a research task, right? But if we think back to language being learned by using it, by doing it, by having lots of meaningful repetition, and needing to build an understanding of economics for people who are going to study economics, well, what if we do both of those by creating a list of questions with the terminology that they're going to need to know? That's also the answers to these questions are going to be very important for understanding the basics of economics, right? So I can say, let's take those discussion questions using the key language that we've isolated for discussing economics, right? And so now we've got all these questions. If I've got people who have an economic understanding, we might just go through and talk about these. But again, for people preparing for foundational English, you might set this as some kind of group work, right? They might go and research and find the answers to these questions on their own, prepare mini presentations. There's a lot of ways to use this, but just thinking about engaging people with the material and with the language, which we were very easily able to extract from ChatGPT. I mentioned also one of the simpler versions of understanding an economics lecture that you're hearing would be to follow along with an outline, right? And so ChatGPT, again, this just illustrates a function of ChatGPT is, hey, can you create an outline of that section that we're working with? And here it's got instantly, right? So what they could do is listen along to this. They say they've got a 3 or 4 minute segment. They listen along and they check off the topics that they hear. Maybe I would include a few things in there that were not mentioned, right? And say, can you find which ones were not mentioned, right? Again, it's like having training wheels, a form of scaffolding, simpler than doing the thing without training wheels, right? But one possible way. And also just to outline to you here, one of the nice uses of ChatGPT, generating the text, but also outlining the text, right? That's kind of the bigger principle I'd like you to think about here is, look how ChatGPT can just take a text and do something with it, right? Outline it, transform it into something completely different, put it in a different order, transform it into a different genre. That kind of remix function of ChatGPT is, I think, brilliant and very, very useful when planning materials, creating materials. Now, I mentioned in my kind of teaching that testing is not often what you think of as testing, right? It's not, I don't want to find out what your CEFR level is, or if you're able to sort of do grammar exercises or something like that. I want to know if you can do the things, right? So in my accounting context, it's very much, okay, can you, according to a rubric, which I'll show you in a bit, do this task in some way, right? Can you do the negotiation? Can you call the customer respectfully? But what about for something like understanding a macroeconomics lecture? Well, I don't know of much of a better way than a simple comprehension test, right? And so a couple more things to illustrate the power of ChatGPT here is that when we want to create the assessment, again, this is not a detailed analysis of creating assessments. It's more or less to illustrate the capabilities of ChatGPT, okay? And then for you to have a think later about how you might apply that to your own use cases, or perhaps to go into it in more detail in a structured course or something like that. So here I've got some comprehension questions. ChatGPT helped me produce these very instantly. Of course, I double check them and make sure this actually is a good set of questions that really captures the essence of the lecture that I want my participants to be able to understand, to say that they've crossed this off the list. Another really interesting thing here is you might think about quiz or test software that you use already. And things like quizzes, this can be done with Google, Microsoft Docs, I've done this with. And this is similar to what I showed you in the beginning about using ChatGPT for data analysis. But I've simply, as an example here, put the questions in, right, to a Google document. And because Google Documents will compile, you might know if you've used Microsoft Forms or Google, it'll compile the questions and answers into something like this. It would have the student's name as well. And then there would be, this is just one example set, but for every student, there would be a row. And now what I have is, okay, I've got all the questions and I've got the answers of one student here. What can I do with this so I don't have to manually read through every single answer in extreme detail? I work with just a couple people at a time typically. So I'm really doing all the assessment, so to speak, as I go. But to put myself in the mind of a busy university teacher, for example, with 100 or more students, I can imagine that shortcuts would be wonderful and welcome. And not to have ChatGPT do the work, but to use it to help. So I simply copy and pasted this. And you can see it's quite a mess, all the questions here and all the answers below. Back to the beginning, you could also use the GPT plugin that I mentioned in the beginning and simply upload your document and then ask ChatGPT to do these things for you. Can you do this? But keep in mind, as I mentioned, I'm not really looking for 100% grammatical accuracy necessarily. I'm looking for, can they do the task? Can they answer the question in a comprehensible way? Right? So I'm not testing them on their grammar and vocabulary use. I'm testing them on did they understand and can they communicate that? But as I mentioned, feedback is also an important thing, right? And so what I want to do is give them a chance to get some feedback and also demonstrate to you how ChatGPT could be used to give feedback. This could be in exam situations, but it could also just be with people's submitted written work, or even how you might have your students interact with ChatGPT in the form of chatbots or talking to ChatGPT itself. how can we have it give us language feedback? Well, here I have, first of all, the answers to the question, right? And people have asked me, would you trust ChatGPT? And that's a tricky question. Do I trust a tired teacher to effectively analyze all of these answers, right? That's also a good question. So I think teamwork is the best way to approach this. We can use ChatGPT, right? So I said, generate the, right? So it gave us the answers. And you can see here, the answer is not grammatically correct. Macroeconomics is study of big picture, like whole economy. And it says it's correct, right? So I can double check that. Yes, that is correct, right? This one is incorrect, right? So I can have it generate a general, was this right or wrong, for me to help me speed up the process of grading, right? But again, to illustrate the bigger principle, maybe you don't want to do this at all, but you can think of ways that you can use ChatGPT to collect data, to collect answers to certain survey questions and things, and then turn them into an analysis that you can actually work with or do something with. I mentioned feedback, and here is the feedback sheet generated by ChatGPT based on that student's answers, right? So again, we said macroeconomics is study of big picture. This gives the student actual language feedback, but remember to use articles and is the study of, right? So they get specific language feedback on their items. So you're turning a test into a learning opportunity. Why not use as many things as possible as learning opportunities? And ChatGPT can support that process.
Sam, we have some questions in the chat. Can you go back to the prompt that you gave ChatGPT in order to produce the table?
Yes. Okay. So what did I say?
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, these slides will all be available as well, so you can go in more detail to see exactly what I said and what was produced, right? But this was the one here, right?
Read it out loud for everyone to
yeah, so my Zoom toolbar is, anyone know how to move that?
Okay, the following text contains the student's answer to the test. Create a table. In the first column of the table, include the question. In the second, include the student answer. In the third column, include whether or not the answer was correct. Include the final score for the exam based on correct, non-grammatical accuracy. Following the table, generate a feedback report with personalized feedback on the language errors to help the student improve their English.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So somebody was asking about the prompt then, yeah. Exactly. So you can see here what I'm doing is with great detail, right? I have a visualization of what I want in the end, and I'm telling ChatGPT everything that I want. So I'm literally imagining this ideal table in the end and these results and saying, this is what you need to include. And so for me, one of the most important things about prompting is being very detailed about what you want, right? Don't expect it to read your mind. Be very detailed about what you want and the principles that you're putting into it and what you'd like to come out the other side. Okay, and that helps to produce really good results, right? Again, trial and error. If you don't get what you want the first time, just keep pushing ChatGPT and you'll start to develop this understanding about its capabilities and limitations and the way that you need to communicate with it to get the kind of results that you want, right? So there we had our test results and we had our personalized language feedback, right? And this also demonstrates how ChatGPT is able to give you feedback in different ways. You can have a conversation with ChatGPT and say, hey, let's have a conversation and give me feedback. Now, Elena, you'd mentioned before, what can students do? And we'll look at a chatbot shortly. But that's one great capability here is engaging in conversation, engaging in dialogue, and then producing feedback for you, right? In real time or in this kind of way here where we're providing it in this form. I'll go through this quickly because it's outside of this and we're not having as much time as I would like to have. But this is, again, in my context, getting my head around what is a payment negotiation, right? So an accountant, a big company responsible for trying to reduce the amount of money that their company is paying for a product or service, right? And in addition to the kind of discourse analysis that I showed before, I might just get a really good overview here of what makes this good, right? And ChatGPT can generate some ideas. And again, I would always run these by people to see, is this legitimate, right? But it's a really good starting point. And once you've collected information about what the successful communication looks like, you can turn that into a rubric, right? And so this is something that I might use with my participants. We might work in training on their ability to do and show these things. And then, of course, we would naturally see and discuss the language that goes along with it as we do role plays and watch videos, and they get feedback from me. And then we say, okay, can you do these things? And if not, what elements can we work on? So in the next version, we're going to try to show empathy a little bit more. What ways do accountants do that? And then we might even use ChatGPT. Hey, how can accountants show empathy? Give some examples, right? And so we can work on specific elements of people's communication situations. So we've looked at two forms of assessment here, really simply a comprehension test, right, on a lecture. And we've looked at this example here, which is creating a rubric. This is a very simple rubric, but again, in a task-based approach, I want to know, can people do this? I trust that they're going to improve their ability to do it over time, but can they do it to particular standards? This can also get more detailed. If you're given particular standards that they need to be able to, you can build in those elements, right? Again, for demonstration purposes, I want you to think, okay, so ChatGPT can potentially be used to see what success looks like with a particular item and turn that into some useful kind of rubric. This is a simple version for presentation's sake that's easy to get your head around. Okay, somebody asked about, are you going to demonstrate other tools? What I'm not going to do is demonstrate a whole bunch of all these tons of tools that are coming out that are built on ChatGPT. For many reasons, I think getting familiarized with the language model itself gives you the most control over your work, because a lot of other tools simply create a user interface over the top. So it's basically made a prompt and limited so if you use a lesson planning program based on ChatGPT, many times it actually takes options away from you instead of giving you options. So what I like to primarily demonstrate is how to master ChatGPT and then how to integrate it with other tools in a flexible way, right? Now, these are our words from our economics situation, our economics whole lecture that we've been looking at, right? And I said, please give me the list of those words, but use a comma. And so this is to demonstrate the format that you want ChatGPT to produce. Use a comma instead of a colon. And here's why. You're probably familiar with Quizlet, right? And Quizlet happens to have a comma feature, right? So I've taken the words extracted from my lecture, right? The words that we've deemed to be the most important for students to understand, inserted them into Quizlet, and now we've magically got our words. Normally, I wouldn't do isolated words. This is for example's sake. I would do collocations and chunks and phrases, and even full sentences I think are better. But just to demonstrate, we've taken a list, copy and pasted into Quizlet, right? And now we've got a set of study cards. I can easily share a link with my participants, and they can repeat these words as needed throughout the course, right? Throughout the module. So that's integrating ChatGPT and Quizlet. Another thing that we might do, right? So here we've got our text, right? Let's go to the point of what macroeconomics is. This is from our presentation earlier, okay? And well, a classic way to approach this for lower level learners, let's say they're A2, is, can we make this simple, right? Can we make this simple? And so asking ChatGPT, hey, can you rewrite this so it's understandable? So this way I'm doing what I mentioned before, which is starting to build up some of the terminology and some of the schema slowly for lower level learners. ChatGPT is quite good at simplifying. And if you don't get what you like, just keep pushing. Say, maybe try it simpler. Some people have had good results. Say, explain it to a 12-year-old, explain it to a 10-year-old. I think this did just fine, saying produce it for an A2 level English learner, right? So simplifying is one thing you can do with ChatGPT. Another example is, and it's often argued in TBLT especially, that we don't always want to simplify, because what happens if we simplify is that we actually remove the very words that we want our learners to learn, right? So in this example here, we have some of the terminology in place, but we also cut out some of the key language. And so one solution is to elaborate the input, which means adding further explanation to the terms, right? And again, to demonstrate here how ChatGPT can be used to modify texts in useful and interesting ways. So here I have that, you can see that the sort of initial version is very short, and the modified version is quite long, right? But that's because we're building in all kinds of redundancy here. For example, let's look at EPS, right? Earnings per share. And in the initial version, it's not written out, right? So let's say a lower level English student with limited economics understanding is not going to know what that means, and that's going to cause confusion. Whereas here, we have EPS, but it's also written what it is, earnings per share, with a measure of the amount, and it tells what it is, right? So this is elaborating input. And something else you can think about besides simply simplifying all the time, can we use ChatGPT to do things with text that are more like this, right? So that's elaborating the input. Now, speaking of other tools, I want to demonstrate how we can use other tools integrated with what we've done with ChatGPT. So what I'm going to show you next is how we can take the text that we generated, the simplified version, and how we can produce, I could just read that to students, or I can use one of these wonderful, this is called 11 Labs, and this is a tool for creating realistic voice. So this is AI voice that I'm going to show you. And again, we've taken a complicated lecture from YouTube, simplified a part of it using ChatGPT, and now we're going to hear what that sounds like. So again, we can create listening materials that are useful for people with a lower level of English who need to study economics in a couple of years. Here's what that sounds like.
Let's talk about macroeconomics. Macro means big. So in macroeconomics, we study big things. We don't look at one person or one company. We look at all people and all companies. We want to see how they work together in different markets. Markets can be for goods, money, or jobs. Let's explain some words. Economic agents are the people or groups we study in macro.
Okay, so you can see it's a nice speed. You're able to choose the speed at which that works.
Let's talk about macroeconomics.
And again, that's using commonly available tools that are out there. 11 Labs is not free. You can sign up for a free version of this and get a certain amount of credits that you can use per month. And to create one or two of these nice, there's all kinds of different voices and accents, and you can adjust the speed and things like that. So really interesting, I think, shows a lot of potential. And I quite like it, again, for students who are not ready to listen to that initial lecture, or just creating listening exercises for tasks in general. This will be quick, but we've talked about a kind of in-depth version of TBLT where we are basically backwards designing, as Rob mentioned. We're starting at the end. We're starting with what do I want them to do in the world with language, even if it's 2 years down the road, and reverse engineering the process and how ChatGPT can support that. But this is a lighter version of TBLT, and many are familiar with this. And this doesn't involve redoing your entire curriculum, right? Or anything like that, right? This is the typical task cycle, where this is that other definition of task that we discussed. Communicative, right? Non-linguistic things, right? So this could be telling an anecdote, planning something with others, many different things, that communication activities that we do, communicative tasks in English. This is a very simple framework, right? You set the context. If we're planning a trip, I might say, oh, let's talk about all the places you've been. What are your travel preferences, right? You have a discussion, and then your learners go and they plan, right? They use the internet or something. They plan a trip. right? And you're monitoring that and giving feedback in there. And then afterwards, after they report on their task, you might focus on some items, specific language items from that if you choose, and then repeat the task again, right? So this is a classic sort of, many people are more familiar with this TBLT methodology. And I wanted to show how ChatGPT can make this kind of thing happen rather quickly. Again, I'm showing you a ton of possibilities here. And what I'm hoping is, even if 3 or 4 light bulb moments happen, that you go back into this and have a look at the prompts that I used, the tools that I used, and explore it further, right? But I wanted to show you as many interesting possibilities as possible. So this is a less strict kind of thing. This is, sometimes we're just focusing on telling anecdotes. It's a thing we do socially and in business. And the iPhone version of ChatGPT has a built-in, you might see a built-in microphone button if you use it. And this isn't really just an ordinary, transcriber. This uses what's called Whisper, which is OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT. It's a super high quality, really, really good transcription software. So even teaching virtually, the way that I did this was, a participant of mine was retelling an anecdote. One thing I'll do is, if we're telling anecdotes and I want everyone to participate, I'll say, hey, can you tell us what she just said? Tell us what Petra can you retell that story for us? All right, that gives them a reason to actually pay attention to the one person telling the story. There might be some of my feedback built in, right? So retelling the anecdote that somebody told. And while she told this, I transcribed it with my phone. I simply held my phone to my laptop speaker and transcribed this retelling. And you can see here, there are bits and pieces of negotiation, of understanding. She was asking questions. She's like, did you do this? Or it was this, right? Or it was 1 week before the birthday, right? So you can see that there's a bit of discussion built into this story, right? So telling an anecdote, right? And so in the classroom, this can happen, or a student could simply do this. We could guide students to do this with ChatGPT or with chatbots. What can we do with this in a task-based kind of way? Well, first I said, can you rewrite this story for me? Keep it basically the same, but with small improvements to my original. It was told by an English student, and I want to offer a nice model version. And so ChatGPT produced this a little bit over the top, I have to admit, version of this anecdote of a story that happened to one of my learners. But there's some really interesting little things in there we might think about, like a humorous twist of fate. You can see that in the original version, the concert was great, fantastic, and a famous event for Petra, and it was great. Okay, great, you got your message across. Maybe there are learners who want to make their language more colorful for telling stories. And so we might highlight the fact that it proved to be nothing short of exceptional, right? Quite useful in this story as a piece of language. So the model here is transcribe the communicative situation, be that a conversation or a presentation or a story, have ChatGPT help to produce a model really quickly. And then let's try something else. Provide your original version almost identically, but where there are difficult words or phrases, keep them in the text, but explain what they mean. Because as you can remember with elaborating input, why would we want to take those great things out? And what I quite liked here was, in a humorous twist of fate, which is a funny and unexpected change in the situation, great. They can read that, begin to develop what a humorous twist of fate was, have exposure to it, right? I don't remove it, the possibility of them learning that. Same here, a word like serendipitous, right? Big word. Date turned out to be serendipitous or unexpectedly beneficial. And this worked really well. They said, oh yeah, I can see through context what that means because I've provided the context, right? So we've got the initial version. We have a potential model of how the task can be done, right? And then remember, there is a post-task phase where you might focus on specific elements of the task or specific language items. ChatGPT can support that process as well. I said, okay, show me the differences that you made, right? And so it provided me with the original story, right? And it provided me with the changes. And so I could already see multiple things that I could do with this here. For example, I could say, put these items in order, right? So I could put the I could put these in order and they'd have to read and process the sentences in order to get the story in the correct order, right? So that's called a discourse scramble, where they have to actually put it in the right order. And in order to do that, they have to read it. The other thing I might do is simply have them match these items up together. So I say, okay, here's your version. Let's find the way from the other version and have them sort of match them, right? Probably less useful, I think, because you don't really need to pay deep attention to the sentences in order to match them. But what you can also use ChatGPT for is coming up with more ideas. And so I said, okay, given the original transcript that I gave you and considering the language and storytelling elements, what would be some potential communicative tasks to help learners move from their version to one more like yours? And ChatGPT gives me all these ideas, right? And so realistically, what happened in my context is I use this for post-planning purposes. So we did the anecdote, we read the new version, we highlighted some language, we retold the story. I took this away later and said, you know what, for next time, let's go back to that story and do something. And ChatGPT gave me these wonderful, not all great, but some are really cool ideas of how we can communicatively work on building up the skills, right? And so again, to reiterate here, this is to take a more simple TBLT, not necessarily out of a, say you don't have the opportunity to plan a needs-based syllabus, but you want to include some communicative elements in a low prep way. Well, you might consider a guide like this TBLT and how ChatGPT's functionality can support you in doing that quickly, right? And easily. And so here, just for example's sake, Taskifying a course book. I'm not the first person to say this. A couple of proponents of TBLT, Neil Anderson and Neil McCutcheon, they're really, really good teacher trainers based in different places in Europe. They've written a wonderful book. Actually, I've got it here. This is Activities for Task-Based Learning. A lot of amazing ideas for using the Willis, more like the Willis framework, and how you can adapt that. But they did a couple of webinars on taskifying a course book, right? And what they said made a lot of sense. It said, why don't you start basically by looking for what is the productive, what is the communicative thing here? And so if we do that in this case, just for example's sake, we look here and we see, okay, writing about a book or a film, so expressing our opinions, maybe writing a film review, it says, or here, talking about you, what's the last book or film that you read? Okay, so I won't do that specifically, but I think, yeah, those are things that we do. We talk about our experiences with books, films, products. We might even write a review and share it on Amazon or TripAdvisor or something like that. Those are legitimate things that we do and also have a lot of rich language potential. So I'm just going to ignore all of this stuff here for the reasons that we've already discussed and focus on here and use ChatGPT. And again, you can think about this when you're stuck with a syllabus that you don't have much control over. What is the productive thing, right? I want them to be able to discuss their influences on purchasing decisions, read and understand the reviews, discuss products, and write a review, right? These are the ways, according to the principles and the things that I understand, that we can do that, right? And so let's just quickly have a look at what I think is a more interesting way to do this. Here's a quick outline of it. They're going to discuss, they're going to start with them, right? Not put it at the end, but they're going to start by discussing their preferences and the things that they like. Then, having primed them with that, they're going to read for reviews and rank them. Are they 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star reviews? It is a good review or a bad review, and why? Then they'll collaborate to complete a dialogue. So again, with scaffolding, not having the full conversation, but maybe a chance to consider what you would say as for your half of the conversation, consider that with a group, then conduct their own dialogues, right? Recommending or not recommending a product, and then writing a review, right? So again, we have the writing a review, having the discussions, lots of input, and ChatGPT can help produce that stuff really quickly and easily, right? So the first thing I said was write 4 product reviews ranging from 1 star to 4 stars. right? And it does a really good job with these kinds of texts, I find, right? And you can always say modify them accordingly, right? But you have a lot of nice language in here, high expectations, completely dissatisfied, right? So I've got the reviews that they're going to read. So they'll have the discussion. Eventually they'll read the reviews, right? And again, exploring the Lexis, showing how ChatGPT can help us explore the language. Provide a list of key vocabulary and collocations from the reviews that are associated with their rating, right? Not worth the upgrade, battery drains faster, right? Again, collocations, phrases, chunks, always better than isolated words, right? You get more bang for your buck. You pick up natural language, right? So I've got the vocabulary I need. I've got the reviews, right? And then I said, okay, now take the 3-star review. And so back to text transformation, write it as a dialogue between two friends. And here you go. Yeah, hey, was it worth the upgrade? Well, it's not bad, but it doesn't have any groundbreaking changes, right? And so if you've ever asked ChatGPT to produce a dialogue, sometimes you'll find, oh, that's really like corny, cheesy, unnatural, something you'd see in a course book. How is it any better? Well, the beauty is that you can simply say, make it more natural. And it will, right? So if I didn't like this conversation, I could say, ChatGPT, make it a little bit more formal, or do it in Shakespearean English just for fun. You can have a blast with that stuff. You can say, use different varieties of English, use you know, Liverpool slang. Like, it's crazy, the things that it will incorporate just for your own amusement in modifying the text, right? So then I said, now rewrite the text so that the first friend's name is Christina and the second is Mike. Also remove and replace with a line. So this was an idea of a task I had where they'd work together to come up with some ideas for what they might say in this conversation, right? So they've already had their own conversations. They've read these reviews. They've ranked the reviews, right? Decided which ones are good and bad. And now they're moving into this, right? They might, we're also going to show here how language is flexible, right? And there are a lot of ways. They'll probably all come up with different ideas before comparing to the model and reading the actual conversation or hearing the actual conversation if we make it into audio, right? And so that's what we've done. And what I want to just show here is how to take all this, one way to incorporate it into something much more presentable. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this feature of Word, but basically, if you open Microsoft Word into outline mode, right? So I've told ChatGPT, I don't have the prompt here, but I've said, put all of this material in an outline for Microsoft Word, for a slideshow. I want the title slide. I want this for the name. And then I want each review on a different slide. And then I want the conversation on the final slide. And I've told ChatGPT that, copy and pasted that into Word, opened in outline mode. And then what you simply do is create levels. So what you want to be the title of each slide, you set as level 1, and then the text you set as level 2, right? This is not a detailed description of this. It's showing you the possibility, which you can easily find out how to do this later. So for me, this was a lifesaver because putting things together in a way that look presentable, particularly for virtual environments, I think can be a mess. So I've got everything I produced in 15 minutes on ChatGPT, and then you can save that, right? And you can export this into PowerPoint. So I opened PowerPoint, clicked Insert, New Slides from Outline, right? And then I opened the Word file that I had saved, and voila, one click later, so I clicked on Design, and this is AI too, by the way. Microsoft Designer, that's over here on the right side, gave me a selection of designs that I can use to present this material. This is a really, really simple one. There was some more complicated ones as well, but there I've got my material to present in PowerPoint form. I could also take the PowerPoints and use them as say a Jamboard or whiteboard program background, okay? And use those. Look, we're gonna run out of time here, Elena. We wanna go for a hard 11 o'clock stop?
Yeah, it's going to be 12 in 5 minutes here.
Yep. Oh, 12 there. Okay. Okay.
We'll need a break. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let's just quickly finish here. What I want to just show you here is this is This is word wall. So like with the commas with Quizlet, right? You can use word wall and copy and paste as a table. And then you've got language activities using word wall as well. Sorry, we have to rush. But again, a reflection for you to consider, okay? Have a deeper think about some of these things. I think Elena and I are going to be offering a more in-depth course in the autumn, and she'll tell you more about that or send you more information about that, where we go into the nitty-gritty, the details. We work so that you'll actually produce a course of your own using the principles that we showed today, because it's really not enough in 2 hours. What I hope is that you kind of get some social learning. It's more not me telling you what to do, but me showing you some of the things. You can literally see what I've prompted in my thinking and start thinking about how that might apply to your own work. This is all stuff that should be clear by now, right? Is that I don't simply tell ChatGPT to do everything for me. I stay in the loop. It's always me in a conversation. This is what I want. I get the feedback and I keep producing it, right? Learn to use it by using it, right? I personally don't believe in long, complicated scientific ways of looking at prompting. Do it. See what works, figure it out, like learning to have a conversation with a friend, right? You don't learn how to have a conversation with a friend with a manual. You learn it by doing it, right? And pedagogical principles are essential. Here is that these are shared prompts. You simply scan these QR codes and you can have a lot of fun exploring things that I've already built. This is the discourse analyzer. This will help you think about generating task modules, for example, from the understanding the lecture. What are some ideas for making that simpler? It can give you a lot of ideas. This one generates 50 tasks on a topic that you give it according to Willis's task model. Really cool, but also make your own prompts, share them with your colleagues. This is amazing. You can generate basically your own programs of doing awesome things and sharing them with your colleagues. I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. So sorry that we had limited time. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will be happy to answer any pressing questions that you have. Send me a message. Send me a message.